This was never about justice. It was about money. 4,000 years ago, long before banks, long before stock exchanges, long before anyone spoke about the economy as an abstract system one ruler grasped a truth, most people still struggle to accept civilizations don't fall because people become immoral. They fall when financial rules stop working, and when those rules break, violence fills the gap. Welcome to the financial timeline where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it seems. When most people hear the name Hammurabi, they picture revenge. An eye for an eye. A harsh, primitive world where justice was brutal and mercy didn't exist. It's a convenient image, easy to remember, and almost entirely false. Because when you strip away the mythology and actually read what was carved into stone around 1754 BCE, something uncomfortable becomes clear. The Code of Hammurabi is not a moral document. It's a financial one. Out of nearly 300 laws, most have nothing to do with murder or assault. They deal with loans, wages, contracts, interest, collateral, defaults, liability, and debt. In other words, the mechanisms that quietly determine who survives and who doesn't once a society grows beyond a small tribe. Babylon wasn't an ethical experiment. It was a commercial engine. Positioned at the center of major trade routes, it moved grain, silver, livestock, land, labor, and credit across a growing population. Farmers borrowed against future harvests. Merchants financed long-distance trade. Builders were paid to construct homes and infrastructure. Everything depended on trust. But trust doesn't scale without enforcement. Without shared rules, every bad harvest becomes a personal catastrophe. Every unpaid loan turns into a blood feud. Every collapsed house becomes a justification for violence. Hammurabi didn't inherit a peaceful society and decide to moralize it. He inherited a volatile economic system and chose to stabilize it. This is what most people miss. The code wasn't designed to make people virtuous. It was designed to make outcomes predictable, because unpredictability is what kills economies. When responsibility is unclear, trade freezes, credit evaporates, people retreat to force. Hammurabi understood that the fastest way to stop chaos wasn't to preach ethics, it was to define who pays when things go wrong. The moment liability is assigned, behavior changes. Incentives emerge. A system forms. Debt was the first threat he confronted. In ancient Mesopotamia, debt wasn't abstract. It was immediate and personal. If a farmer borrowed grain and the harvest failed, he didn't default on paper, he defaulted in real life. His land could be seized, his children taken as debt servants, his family erased over a single bad season. Left unchecked, these debt spirals didn't just ruin individuals. They hollowed out the tax base, destabilized food production, and fueled unrest. A society that permanently buries its producers under debt doesn't survive long. So limits were imposed, not out of compassion but necessity. Interest was capped. Debt servitude was time-limited instead of lifelong. In certain cases, debts were suspended after natural disasters. These weren't merciful gestures. They were acts of risk management. Enslaved or dead farmers don't grow grain, and a king without grain doesn't stay king for long. Hammurabi wasn't protecting the poor. He was protecting the system that fed the empire. Then came contracts. The laws didn't care about intentions. They cared about outcomes. If a builder constructed a house and it collapsed, killing the owner, the builder paid the price. If a merchant lost goods entrusted to him, responsibility didn't vanish into excuses. This wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. When accountability is clear, risk gets priced correctly. Builders build better. Merchants insure themselves. Trade becomes safer, not because people are kinder, but because consequences are known in advance. This was the code's quiet brilliance. It didn't try to eliminate failure. It assigned Italiano, someone always paid. And once people knew who that someone would be, behavior adjusted. The idea that risk must land somewhere, that losses don't disappear simply because circumstances were unlucky, is one of the oldest financial principles on earth. Long before insurance firms or limited liability corporations, Hammurabi understood moral hazard without naming it. If people are responsible for outcomes, they take reckless risks. And reckless risk, multiplied across a society, becomes collapse. Wages and prices followed the same logic. The code specified fixed payments for specific kinds of labor. Ox drivers earned this much, surgeons that much, builders, shepherds, craftsmen. Their compensation was standardized. Not because it was fair, but because it reduced conflict. Every negotiation creates friction. Every dispute risks breakdown. Hammurabi removed uncertainty. You knew what your labor was worth before you arrived. You knew what you'd earn if things went rattan, what would happen if they didn't. Markets don't need kindness. They need consistency. Hammurabi wasn't trying to maximize happiness. He was trying to keep commerce moving. And consistency is the lubricant of trade. It lowers transaction costs, prevents endless bargaining, stops disagreements from turning violent. In a world without courts, appeals, or regulators, these rules were the infrastructure of trust. But there was one feature that shatters the romantic image of ancient justice. The rules were not equal. Penalties varied by social class. The same injury carried different consequences depending on status. Financial liability flowed differently for nobles, commoners, and slaves. Power was written directly into the law. This wasn't hypocrisy. It was design. Elites were protected because they controlled land, capital, and political stability. Lower classes absorbed more risk because the system required it. This wasn't about fairness, it was about preserving hierarchy. Systems don't just manage money. They decide who absorbs losses when things go wrong. Hammurabi made that decision explicit. The stone didn't conceal it. It announced it. By the time the code was carved and displayed publicly, Babylon had already learned a lesson. Modern societies still resist. You don't control debt with virtue. You don't stabilize trade with good intentions. And you don't prevent collapse by hoping people behave better. You do it by writing rules that make outcomes predictable, losses assignable, and power visible. Because once money enters a society, morality alone is never enough. And here's the part most people don't like hearing. The system worked, not because it was fair, not because it was humane. It worked because it accepted a truth. Most societies deny that every economic system is built around deciding who absorbs risk when reality breaks the plan. Code didn't pretend losses could be eliminated. It didn't promise universal prosperity. It did something more dangerous and more effective. It made loss predictable. Once loss is predictable, power can plan around it. That's why equality was never the goal. Stability was, if an elite injured another elite, punishment was physical. If he injured a commoner, payment was made in silver. If he injured a slave, compensation went to the owner because the law treated the loss not as human suffering, but as damaged capital. A surgeon who killed a noble lost his hands. If the patient was a slave, he replaced the asset. A builder was executed. If a house collapse killed its owner but paid compensation, if it killed a slave, elites held land, capital, and authority. Protecting them wasn't corruption, it was risk containment. When a landholder collapsed, the shock spread through tenants, taxes, and food supply. When a laborer collapsed, the system barely noticed. That wasn't morality. It was and it's the same arithmetic that governs modern financial systems, no matter how politely it's framed. This is where ancient history starts to feel uncomfortably familiar. What Hammurabi carved into stone, we encode into policy. Bankruptcy laws don't reward failure, they contain it. Debt relief isn't generosity, it prevents cascading defaults. Central banks don't intervene because they love markets. They intervene because unmanaged collapse is worse. 4,000 years separate Babylon from today, but the logic hasn't changed. When debt threatens the system, rules bend. When instability rises upward, intervention appears. When it stays at the bottom, it's ignored. That's not ideology, it's structure. Consider inflation. It isn't just rising prices, it's redistributed loss. It erodes savings, lightens real debt burdens, shifts pain from borrowers to currency holders. That logic didn't begin with fiat money. It's the same logic behind capped interest and suspended debts after disasters. You don't let the financial system consume the productive base. It depends on you reshape the rules so damage spreads instead of concentrates. Modern societies speak endlessly about fairness and opportunity. Ancient Babylon was more honest. The code didn't pretend everyone played the same game. It told you exactly where you stood. It told you who paid when things went wrong. It didn't claim morality ruled money. It admitted that money ruled morality, that honesty made the system durable. Predictability creates participation. Participation creates growth. Growth creates power. Chaos doesn't come from inequality alone. It comes from uncertainty, from not knowing whether tomorrow's loss will destroy you or be absorbed by the system. Modern finance still runs on this principle. The difference is that today the rules are buried in legal language, regulation, and balance sheets few people read. In Babylon, they were carved in stone and placed in public view. No illusion, no myth of fairness. Just structure. This is why so many people feel unsettled by the modern financial system. They sense something isn't moral, but they're searching in the wrong place. The system was never built to be moral. It was built to survive. And survival always demands sacrifice. Someone always pays. The only real question is who and whether the rules make that answer visible or hide it behind complexity. Hammurabi didn't promise freedom. He promised order, and in doing so, he revealed something most people still resist. Financial freedom doesn't come from believing the system is just. It comes from understanding how it actually works. From knowing where risk flows, from recognizing which rules bend under pressure and which ones never do. That is the real legacy of the code. Not vengeance, not cruelty, but the realization that once money enters a society, power must choose between chaos and control always protects the system before it protects individuals. The first civilization learned this the hard way. Every civilization since has learned it again, usually in crisis. History doesn't repeat. It refines. The tools change. The language evolves, but the structure remains. Debt still binds. Rules still decide outcomes. Power still manages collapse before it manages justice. And those who understand this aren't shocked when systems bend to save themselves. They expect Italiano. Because the oldest financial rule on earth was never about right or wrong. It was about survival. And 4,000 years later, we're still playing by it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.